You're listening to There Ought to Be a Law, the Center for Auto Safety podcast with Executive Director Michael Brooks, Chief Engineer Fred Perkins, and hosted by me, Anthony Simino. For over 50 years, the Center for Auto Safety has worked to make cars safer.
It is hot.
Hey, everybody, welcome to another soon-to-be contentious issue of the Center for Auto Safety podcast, There Ought to Be a Law.
Good morning, folks.
If you haven't done so already, click like, click subscribe. I don't know what app you're using, so I don't know how to do that. But tell your friends, and then go to autosafety.org, click on donate. And we begin. So, it's the end of the year, it's the end of administration, and NHTSA, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, is getting busy with it. They are releasing rule after rule after rule. Let's start off with they're releasing the rear seatbelt reminder rule, which if you've ever driven a car in the last decade, I just figured this was a rule, as sometimes my groceries set it off. Michael.
Yeah, this is a rule that we've been waiting for a long time. It was first petitioned for in 2007 by advocates for highway and auto safety and Public Citizen. Congress required NHTSA to do it in 2012. About two or three infrastructure acts ago, to be finished up by 2015. It wasn't finished by 2015, so we sued NHTSA in 2017 and essentially lost that lawsuit on the basis that the rule was based on assurances by the Department of Transportation that the rule was going to be released imminently. Imminently apparently means 7 years these days in the federal government. But beyond, all that introduction, which is a lot of the negatives and how long it takes, somewhat simple rules in the grand scheme of things to be put through and to be required. It takes a long time. I mean, essentially here you're taking the beeper that was going in the front seat, the driver's seat in vehicles, and spreading it around to the rear seats and the passenger seat. And we call this the rear seatbelt reminder rule, but ultimately it's more than that. I mean, what they're doing here is adding the passenger seat in the front. A lot of manufacturers had already been putting rear seat belt reminders in that seat, but neglecting to put them in the rear seats. But what this does is mandate rear seatbelt seatbelt reminders, period, for all seats in the vehicle, including vehicles in the rear vehicles that have seats that are removable. When you pull them out and put them back in, they have to reconnect up electronically to the system so that they work. And it's a great rule for a pretty simple reason. Right now, we're seeing, around 40,000 deaths on our roads every year. Half of the people who are dying, 51%, are unbuckled. And so, while front seatbelt use is somewhere around 91%, rear seatbelt use is around 80%. Those seem like, decent numbers. Some commenters seem to think those are good numbers. I think they show we still have a long way to go. Half of the fatalities we see are due to people who don't have their seatbelts on. So it's more important than ever that these reminders are effective, and that, and NHTSA trying to make sure that, the standard that was around for the front seats since the 70s basically just required that audible chime that you hear. The new standard is going to require both audio and visual notifications. And in some circumstances, it's not going to turn off and stop annoying someone until they buckle their seatbelt. So it's hopefully going to be very effective overall. I think the agency is predicting that it will save somewhere around 50 lives per year and prevent, thousands of injuries. I think it may do more than that, especially if people start heeding the warnings and, they're not going to be able to shut the systems off. They're essentially going to have to either be very annoyed or put on their seatbelts so that they're protected. So it's a great rule. Took far too long to get put in place. And the manufacturers could have been better at getting this technology into their vehicles before 2027, which I believe is the final compliance date for this rule.
This just sounds like more of the nanny state telling me what to do. Now, so you just said the front seat belt reminders was put in place in the 70s?
For the driver's seat, there was never a requirement to have these reminders in the passenger seat in the front of the car.
Well,
So
you're telling me the cars built in the 1970s had to have this? Because I do not remember any of the adults I lived with in the 1970s or probably up until like the late 80s wearing a seatbelt in the driver's seat.
yeah, and I think it was just a chime at that
Oh.
point, like a very brief kind of. I think it was often they used the same chime that was used for when you left your keys in the car and opened your door. It was all kind of connected to a similar sound system, if my memory serves correct.
See, I think they should have a vibrating seat warning. Oh, then people would like it as a massage chair.
Well, I
Never
mean,
mind.
what you could do is simply, not allow the car to be started until the seat belts are on, which is another way to ensure that the occupants are buckled.
I love it. I'm on board with that. The next rule is the whistleblower rule. Now, this is surprising. This is interesting because this is from a Wall Street Journal article. Before the rules were finalized, the NHTSA had already issued a $24.3 million to a former Hyundai motor engineer in 2021
Yep.
in its first ever whistleblower award. The recipient, South Korean automotive engineer Kim Kwang-ho, first reported to NHTSA in 2016 that his then employer Hyundai had failed to address a design flaw linked to engines seizing up and at times catching fire. So
Right.
back in 2016, this guy blows the whistle on it, but there's no actual whistleblower protections at this point.
Well, they had been passed by Congress in 2015 in the FAST Act, but it's taken, I think that's 9 years for the actual final rule to be released. However, during that time period, NHTSA said they were operating as though, well, at least the current NHTSA, the Biden administration's NHTSA, said they were operating as though that rule were already in effect. But essentially, that rule extended some of the people who could qualify as whistleblowers under the law. The previous guidance that had been issued around this didn't extend it to things like suppliers and contractors of automakers, and didn't provide really any guidance for what the awards could or would be. There's still a little pushback from the whistleblower community around the award structure here. The NHTSA administrator will have some discretion in terms of how much these whistleblowers are going to be rewarded for coming forward. In that Hyundai case, the whistleblower that came forward, the South Korean man, his life was essentially ruined by him coming forward. He lost his job, I think his family, and it was a terrible story. When people take great risks to their livelihood, to their family structure, to their safety in some circumstances, to come forward and save lives, we think they should be rewarded generously for, all the suffering that they incur along the way. The rule kind of gives a wide latitude to how much can be awarded to whistleblowers. And, maybe that's justified because some whistleblowers might have far better information than others. But that's one of the only areas where I've seen some pushback on the new rules.
A question for you, Michael. If one
Yep.
of our listeners happens to have an issue they think could be addressed through this whistleblower rule, what should they do? Should they contact you? Should they contact me or call NHTSA or
They can
call their
reach out
local
to
country
us.
lawyer?
Yeah, reach out to us, and probably the best thing to do in that circumstance would be to connect with an experienced attorney who knows the whistleblower laws back and forth, and has been through the process before.
Well, where would they find such a person? That's most people don't really have, intimate contact with a lawyer who's experienced in whistleblower cases.
We know of a few that we'd be happy to recommend. It would depend on their case and other things. We get, we occasionally get calls for people. Well, I guess the first thing to note is that if you're not working for a motor vehicle manufacturer in any capacity, you're not going to qualify as a whistleblower. So if you're just a listener who sees something wrong, you're not going to be eligible for the whistleblower program. It's going to be limited to employees, contractors, suppliers of automakers. So that's kind of the first step. And then once you have, if you meet that standard, then you probably want to look at, documenting your claims in very thoroughly and in a way that, really it helps shed light on the case that you're presenting. And also, a lot of whistleblowers are rightly concerned about protecting their privacy and preventing their identity from being released because, sometimes they're actually still employed by the same company they might be blowing the whistle on. So that's really why it helps immensely to have some legal guidance along the way.
So what people should do is first be convinced they've got something worth talking about. Second would be to call you or contact you to get a referral. And third would be to work with that referred lawyer to develop the case. Is that correct?
Yes. And then at that point, yes, you would submit essentially make your whistleblower submission to NHTSA under the new rules and guidelines. And NHTSA essentially would, it's kind of a black box there because we're talking about an enforcement action and an action that essentially most things that whistleblowers come, if they're successful whistleblower submissions, you could be looking at civil penalties and fines against the manufacturer. That's actually where the whistleblower award money comes from. And so it's really important to dot your I's and cross your T's and present the best case you can to the agency.
Summarizing, I guess you would say, do not try this at home. Get expert advice.
I would definitely say that. Simply because it helps to be knowledgeable of the types of things, the types of safety violations that NHTSA is going to be focused on, and just how it helps to have a friend in that situation in a lot of cases. That's one thing that, many whistleblowers don't exactly feel like they have the full support of all of their companions at work and, their bosses certainly. And, they're looking for someone who can help guide them through the process most of the time.
All right. And after you get your whistleblower award, go to autosafety.org and click on that donate button. Come on. All right, let's go to the next NHTSA bit of wonderfulness. NHTSA put out their study on how many lives have been saved. I'm going to say this slowly so Michael finds the correct press release. NHTSA study.
Well, you skipped an important rule, another rule. So
I'm getting to the EDR rule later on.
Yeah.
Don't you worry.
Well,
and the crash data,
yeah. So NHTSA put out it's a study they conduct every few years, where essentially they go back and review the number of fatalities that have been prevented or injuries that have been prevented because of the motor vehicle safety standards that have been put in place over the years. So. And I think in the latest NHTSA report, there were somewhere, they're saying that since 1968, NHTSA safety standards have prevented about 860,000 deaths and 49 million non-fatal injuries and 65 million damaged vehicles. So that is a huge economic benefit to the country, and I have to think far outweighs. I think even just taking seatbelt requirements alone, you're going to far outweigh the cost to install a lot of these safety technologies into vehicles. And even a rough estimate, suggests, that maybe, NHTSA's numbers here are a little low. If you look at the crash rate in 1967 before NHTSA was founded, it was about 5.34 fatalities per 100 million miles traveled. if you bring that forward to today's population, instead of seeing, a little under 40,000 fatalities per year on our roads, we'd be seeing right about 170,000 fatalities per year on our roads. So I don't think there's any question that the federal motor vehicle safety standards have been the main impetus behind that drop that in fatalities per mile traveled that we've seen in the past 50 years.
So why would anyone want to roll these things back and remove regulations like that?
Well, I mean, there is a large faction of America that seems to believe that the market can protect people just as well as regulations. We disagree strongly because mainly we've seen some of the problems that happen when you have companies that don't really have a proper safety culture, that care a lot more about making money and care a lot more about their quarterly earnings reports than they do about actually preventing problems on the road.
Hey, you're stealing my thunder for Gaslight
All
Illumination,
right,
Michael.
Yeah.
I'll stop.
We
But
said we were never going to discuss GM Cruise again.
but this, it's important for people to realize this. I mean, and you look at, different presidential administrations and you start to see where the impact happens. We've had three final rules that NHTSA announced this week. We've talked about two of them so far. We're going to get to EDR. That is, I'm pretty sure that's more than the number of final rules that were issued during the entire 4 years of the Trump administration, where I think they issued two. One of them was on sounds that hybrid and electric vehicles produce, and one was on, I want to
Flavor of
say,
steering wheels.
yeah,
Must
I
taste
can't
like chicken.
remember. I think maybe it'd been battered or the electrolyte spillage or something. I can't remember the other rule that was acted on. But certain administrations simply do not believe in using regulations to advance safety, and some do. And we're about to run into another 4 years of one that doesn't. NHTSA, the current NHTSA, I believe, is approaching 40 final rules and about 25 proposed rules in their 4 years. So right there, you can see the gigantic difference in the approach to regulatory and safety regulation from the two parties.
Hmm. And listener, this is why we need you and your support to help us fight through the next 4 years. Because we've survived over 50 years fighting through people who are like, I don't want to do regulations. But they need that pressure on them constantly. Even when it feels like it's a losing battle, they need that pressure, and we provide that pressure. And now it's time for that final NHTSA rule. This final rule amends regulations regarding event data recorders to extend the event data recording period for timed data metrics from 5 seconds of pre-crash data at a frequency of 2 hertz to 20 seconds of pre-crash data at a frequency of 10 hertz. And if you think I'm Fred Perkins, you're wrong.
So the 2 hertz and 10 hertz things aren't quite as confusing as they sound, right? So essentially, they're adding another 15 seconds pre-crash, and that's to capture certain pre-crash factors that occur, in those additional 15 seconds before the crash. Event data recorders, black boxes, as you'll most often hear them called, they record a small subset of the data that vehicles are generating. They're certainly not capturing everything. They're recording, whether the airbags were deployed and when that happened, where they're recording, braking and acceleration and some basic things. You're not going to, additional 15 seconds. I don't think you're going to be capturing a lot about the vehicle's partial automations. And we wonder about this a lot in Tesla crashes, for instance. What exactly happened in those final seconds before a crash, where who was in control? Was the vehicle in control? Was it warning the driver properly? The EDR is not going to be able to capture a lot of that, and in many ways, the current event data recorders, the black boxes, are they're somewhat dinosaurs. They're old technology. A lot of manufacturers are capturing far more depth and detail of data on vehicle safety and on crashes than the EDRs would, but it still really helps crash investigators to figure out the basics of a crash. And so they're super important. They're still not required on vehicles. 99.5% of vehicles have them. I know that the major outlier there is Porsche, who refuses to put them in their vehicles, and the federal government so far has not been willing to mandate them across industry, even though everyone except Porsche and maybe one other small manufacturer are using them. So it's great that NHTSA got the rule out to update the time standard. We do think that, we think that there should be an advanced EDR rule. We think that we need to mandate more collection of new types of data on vehicles, and that ultimately, that's something that's going to happen at some point. Not sure how far down the line that will happen. And then back to the Hertz thing that I didn't cover. So the Hertz, they're raising the sampling rate from 2 Hertz, which is they're basically taking 2 data points every second, to 10 Hertz, which is 10 data points every second. So they're collecting the data more frequently as the crash approaches.
All right, that's pretty good. And we know what's happening in a Porsche before a crash. Everything's awesome. The driver is just, I am the best person on planet Earth. But then they're having imposter syndrome, and that's why they crashed. Ah! Anyway, he's been vibrating like a tuning fork the entire show, dying to get to his Gaslight illumination this week. And we're going to start off with Fred Perkins, because myself and Michael will battle later on over ours.
Yeah.
Mr. Perkins, please illuminate us with your gaslightness. What?
Thank you. I'm so excited. This is an announcement by Waymo that the title is Waymo's First Responder Program Receives Independent Safety Confirmation. This is actually a master class in gaslighting, or shall we say, a brownwashing automatic.
Oh.
It's really wonderful. It's just a great example. So I'm glad I didn't have the job to do this. Some very creative writer went into this, but let me go ahead. So they say, quoting, "Today we are proud to share that Waymo's first responder program was independently reviewed by TÜV Süd," if I got that pronunciation right, a global leader in safety testing and certification, making it the industry's first such program to be validated according to industry best practices by a third party. Well, that sounds pretty good. We've been calling for third-party review of AV safety for a long time.
Who paid this third party?
Sorry?
Who paid this third party?
Who pays this third party?
Waymo.
Yeah. Who paid this independent third party?
By Waymo.
By Waymo? Oh, okay, just real independence.
Well, nobody's going to do the work for free, right? So
nobody does the work for free, no. And
they're
this
going to
is
have to pay them.
kind of like reminiscent of 2008 when the people who are selling mortgages were free to shop the mortgages to the
Standard & Poor's
organization that would give them the
Moody's?
best credit rating. Yeah, so it's kind of like that.
Yeah.
Okay, so what's wrong with that? Well, first of all, they say that their first responder program was independently reviewed. Doesn't say audited, it says reviewed. Okay, so review is a pretty squishy word. Reviewed by TÜV Süd. Well, okay, so what history has TÜV Süd got for looking at the operational safety of AVs? And it turns out none.
Oh.
So they've been around for a long time, but they said that they've got a simulation and training framework which allows multiple scenarios, system configurations, and driver characteristics to be tested and analyzed. That's good. But, if you dig a little deeper, it turns out that they've never done this before. I'm looking for that quote right now.
Yeah, I mean, well, it would have been, this is a very new field, so it would have been hard for them to do it, before anyway, right? Yeah.
That's true. That's correct.
Yeah.
So there's really, but I guess summarizing, there is no industry history, so it's hard to know exactly what that means. So Waymo goes on to say, making industry's first such program to be validated. Note again the use of validated, but first they were reviewing, now they're validating, but they're not auditing. Okay. And then they finally say, according to industry best practices by a third party. Well, that sounds awfully good, but there are no industry best practices. There are no standards. There are no generally accepted standards for what the operational safety of an AV ought to do.
Well, they have, right? The Autonomous Vehicle Safety Coalition has put out what they call best practice guidelines.
They sure have.
And that is what TÜV Süd was. They weren't certifying. I want to be clear about that. I think a couple of media reports on this used the word certification. They're not certifying anything. Essentially, you've got this independent third party, which is TÜV Süd, being approached by Waymo and saying that, yeah, Waymo meets these best practice guidelines, which is about as wishy-washy of language as you can get, put out by a autonomous vehicle a consortium of autonomous vehicle manufacturers. There aren't any safety experts involved there. And on top of that, we've got this system of loosey-goosey confirmation by a third party, but also, Waymo didn't show us the report. Nobody's seen the report from TÜV Süd. We have no idea what they tested, why they tested, how they tested. It's kind of like this, I don't know, a closed circuit of this pretend certification regime where, the public ultimately doesn't really get any new information other than Waymo saying, trust us,
Wait,
right?
so this this autonomous vehicle coalition, would Waymo happen to be its, I don't know, largest member?
Well, let me get to that. This is like a layer cake, okay? So let's go back to TÜV Süd first. So they say that on their website excuse me. TÜV Süd is developing a simulation and testing framework, which allows multiple scenarios, environments, yada, 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 to be tested and analyzed. We'll be providing these links, by the way, for interested people. So that seems to be a work in progress. They don't have their work done. They're developing it. And so that's interesting. So TÜV Süd was hired by Waymo to do it, was ordered to do it according to the AVSC. But what is the AVSC, right? The AVSC is an industry group that was formed in 2019. And according to their website, it's an industry program of SAE Industry Technologies Consortia that produced this document. Now, notice they cite SAE, but the SAE ITC is a subsidiary of SAE International. So they're hanging on to the idea that because it's an SAE document, that it's been vetted and it's been accepted by industry. That's not the case. They're just using that as a cover so they can do this without antitrust problems. So that's another lie that's in there, or another implication that they've got SAE imprimatur, but they don't really. The group they're using just publishes things. In fact, they say it's an industry program of SAE Industries Technologies Consortia. And according to their website, it's where industry comes together to address shared needs and opportunities. But industry is not the only stakeholder in AV safety. Other stakeholders include the public, include regulators. None of those people were involved in the development of this document by AVSC. So where Waymo says it's a standard, what it really is a white paper that's been put out without any industry or safety advocacy review.
Yeah. And if you look at the standards, they're not standards, the guidelines or the best practices document that they're talking about, there aren't any tests specified in it. There's just there's a lot of words, but not a lot of actual tests that need to be run.
Well,
and certainly no guidance on simulation testing that TÜV Süd seems to be conducting.
Well, it's even worse. There's not a single what's called a normative statement. A normative statement is something that you must conform to in order to comply with a standard, for example. So, a number or a hard characteristic would be a normative standard. There's nothing in here. So if you look at compliance with this document for AV safety, your grandfather's 1970 Ford Pinto could equally well be certified to be compliant with this AV safety document. There's just nothing there. In fact, the word safety is undefined. They refer obliquely to ISO 26262, but that document does not define safety in any affirmative way. It just says that safety is the absence of unacceptable risk or unreasonable risk. But that's not a definition. That's just a property that such a definition would have. Um, there's just so much here. I'm sorry. I feel like I'm rambling a little bit, but
No. Well, I mean, this is
but
kind of
Tube Soot
this.
itself is contradicting their own standards when they say that they're when they say that they're doing this, because on their website they say that international government regulations are required. So why are they then compromising themselves by going ahead and apparently certifying or somehow testifying that what Waymo is doing is okay in the absence of the requirements that they advocate are necessary on their own website? So,
Money.
you start with that, and they're propagating it up to the AVSC, which has got no basis for saying that they have an industry standard, except that they declare it's an industry standard. And then you move into the actual announcement, parsing the words. It just doesn't support things. AVSC has 9 corporate members. It does not include Tesla, which is the largest producer of extended duration self-driving vehicles in the world. So you wonder, how do they come up with a best practice that doesn't include the people who are actually doing the work?
Well, I would say that, yeah, Tesla's not going to be an exemplar for any best
Yeah,
practices in
they're
that
not
area.
really doing self-driving.
Yeah,
No, but
that's
but the fact is that they do that.
They do the level 2 stuff. Yes, they do a level 2 plus. Right.
So let me wrap this up. I know I'm going on long, but for misrepresenting the pedigree underlying the third-party assessment safety basis, for claiming the AVSC's output as legitimate industry standard versus the reality of its self-serving vacuity, for not clarifying the scope of TÜV-SÜD's validation versus an audit that contradicts TÜV-SÜD's own safety advocacy, and generally pathetically claiming safety certification to industry standards where, in fact, none exist, I'm nominating Waymo as the Gaslight of the Week, if not the year. This is a real masterclass in gaslighting.
This, bravo. I think this is excellent. I think we've pointed out over the last couple of months that Waymo's been on a really big PR push lately. Since they drove into a stationary utility pole, they've been really hitting the media up and talking about how great they are constantly. And the media is just like, I will cut and paste the document you sent to me. And this
Right.
is part of that. But so
Well,
TÜV SÜD, I've got on the internet and I've done some research about this company here. And let's see, they inspect and audit engineering things. They do everything. They started with steam boilers and locomotives. And so in 2015, they audited and certified a dam from the mining company Vale. And that dam collapsed and killed a bunch of people. So the Brazilians, where it
I
collapsed,
remember that one.
they issued arrest warrants for 2 of the TÜV SÜD quote unquote engineers. Also, let's see, they certified the manufacturing process for breast implants that failed and injured over 1,600 women. So TÜV SÜD, I'll say anything for $1. They are not
Well,
Underwriters Laboratory. They're not. They're like Standard and Poor's and Moody's back in 2008. Can I
I
say
mean,
all this? Yeah.
what they're setting up. I mean, what this is, this is Google's dream is, and any autonomous vehicle manufacturer's dream is to set up a fake certification scheme that doesn't have any hard rules, right? This is what the traditional auto manufacturers have been trying to put in place every time there's an issue that comes up. They tried it, with automatic emergency braking. We talked about that all the time. They want to come up with these voluntary agreements where they're held to, as low a standard as possible so they can delay the investment in safety technologies and sell them as options for years before they come out. They want a scheme that's not mandatory. They just want kind of guidelines signs. They don't want anyone to be able to hold their feet to the fire when they don't put safety into their vehicles fast enough. This is essentially Waymo trying to create a similar scheme for autonomy. Certifying to standards that don't exist with a third party, independent third party, supposedly holding your feet to the fire, which isn't really a fire because there aren't any standards. So it's a, kind of a, there's no room in there for regulators or for safety advocates or for anyone to get any real safety put into those rules and those certification processes. So that's ultimately what they want. And in addition to that, they want to, at some point they're going to be pushing in the next few months to get laws put on the books in the United States where cities and states and localities, don't have the ability to regulate these vehicles either. So essentially they want to do whatever they want and keep the rest of us at arm's length while they thrust these vehicles onto our roads, and we won't have a say in what happens.
If Waymo vehicles are so safe, why did they need to lie? I think this is just capital trying to preserve itself as the air is rapidly leaking out of the AV bubble.
I think, as I mentioned last week, at some point in the not too distant future, Waymo will go, or Google will go, wait a second, we're an advertising company. Why are we burning all this billions and billions of dollars? Because their CEO is going to be like, I have a driver. I don't need this auto car. I'll keep having Brad drive me around. I assume in this scenario, his driver's name is Brad. He's tall. He wears a cap. Anyway, let's continue with gaslighting. So this one, okay, turns out before the show started, Michael and I agreed on the same topic, okay? But
I think we'll have different reasons.
We're gonna have different takes on it. Okay,
you go ahead. You go ahead first because yours is probably going to be funnier than mine.
Mine is on bench seats. Remember bench seats in cars? I do. I think my parents had like a Chrysler Valiant, maybe. Is that what it was? And the entire front seat was just one big bench. And so we got to move the seat forward. Everyone had to bend down and grab and slide the seat forward with it. It was a time when we didn't wear seatbelts. So there's an article in Road and Track, and I feel bad for the person who wrote it because they're dating a dangerous person. Quoting from the article, my girlfriend's chief complaint about modern cars is that I sit too damn far away. A bench seat could fix all of that, she proclaimed. No, she's saying, I want to die. When you're driving, I want to die. I want to be in the center console where there's no airbag protection. I want to die. Further down in the article, it says that millennials and Gen Z, they've never seen a bench seat. So as a result, it holds a warm, nostalgic glow for the under 40 crowd. Social media these days is filled with videos of friends, young couples, and pet owners enjoying the closeness of a bench seat for the first time. Vomit. No, no. There's a reason we don't have bench seats anymore because people were dying. That's my assumption. And I imagine they're more difficult to install. But I think this bench seat nostalgia nonsense is maybe there was like 3 kids on the TikTok who posted something. Their parents at a marketing firm are like, this is what the kids are into. Yeah, you don't have to eat protein powder by the gallon this week. I can do bench seats. This is my
I think they're trying to promote marital communication because there'll be an awful lot of arguments about how close the seat is to the dashboard with a bench seat that are simply not there when you've got bucket seats, individually adjustable.
Well, that's an excellent point as well. But I just still think, because they show a photo where it's like somebody sitting in front of the center console where, again, it's, I don't know how well airbags work covering that spot. But hey, that's my take. What's your take on it, Mr. Brooks?
Well, mine is similar, actually. They're still allowed under federal law. The NHTSA's regulations still allow for these bench seats to be put in the middle. However, NHTSA's regulations don't require airbag protection for those seats. And when you look at the pictures that come out for some of these bench seats. They're not really bench seats. They're not those one long seat in the front where if you want to be closer to the steering wheel, you pull up and the person next to you has to move up as well. You're not together. You're separate, and then it's more of a jump seat, I think is a better name for them. There's essentially a seat that pops up in your center console. And then whatever's in front of you in that seat, which is typically a touch screen, the air conditioner controls, it could be all sorts of things. Those are going to be, you're going to be coming in contact with those in a crash if you don't have an airbag protecting the bench seat. It's unclear if none of these vehicles have airbags that protect the bench seat, if some of them might, and then when you put a passenger in that area, then you lose the ability to put in things like the types of airbags that come in between passengers to protect them from hitting each other. There's a lot of problems with this, and I would advise no one to sit in these seats, if possible, whether your marriage is in trouble or not. Just stick to the seats that have been around for decades, have been tested, and that sort of thing. I mean, there's one, maybe bench seats are somewhat safer because you're in the center of the vehicle and you're more protected from side impact collisions. But that one is probably not enough to outweigh all the other problems with them. I would advise no one to use bench seats.
I agree. And I mean, Fred, you had a great presentation for your Gaslight, but you're outvoted 2-1. I'm sorry. I mean, I agree. Waymo is trying to pull a con on everybody, but bench seats.
Yeah, but you're prejudiced against tall people, Anthony. That's well established.
Look, I mean, if I'm ever in a car with you, I'm going to make sure it's a bench seat and I'm driving because then your face is going to be pressed against the windshield as I move my tiny legs forward. Speaking of tiny legs, Donald Trump. No, I meant Elon Musk. I mean, both of them. From an article linking to an MSN.com, Donald Trump's transition team is taking aim at a Biden-era rule requiring automakers and tech companies to report crashes that involve fully or partially autonomous vehicles. Scrapping the crash reporting rule would greatly benefit Tesla, which to date has reported the most number of crashes. So Let me get this right, because essentially every car sold since 2020 has some level of partially autonomous feature to it.
This one, it's not quite everybody on this one, because this is they've struggled to describe exactly what it is in simple terms. You can't really say it's level 2 or it's almost level 3 under the SAE levels, but essentially it's vehicles where an automation controls both the forward, reverse, and lateral side-to-side movements of a vehicle for an extended period of time. So the advanced cruise controls, autopilot, full self-driving, those types of things.
So my adaptive cruise control, does that count?
If your vehicle is able to control its movement side to side and forward and rear for quite some time, I mean, it's kind of loosely defined.
I've never used it backwards, but I mean, it will do lane keeping assist and automated cruise control.
Yeah, if it's doing those two together on a sustained basis, then it should be included.
Because I think that's like most cars sold for the last, like I was saying, like last 4 or so
years.
A
lot of vehicles still don't come with that technology because automatic emergency braking isn't required until 2029, right?
Okay.
It's in there voluntarily, but they're still selling a lot of this stuff as optional. And they're selling advanced cruise control features as optional. I mean, even Tesla does this. You have to subscribe to them, right? Before so every car that comes out may have certain capabilities there, but not all of them actually have the features. And what this is, the day this standing general order was announced, I want to say around 3 years ago, maybe 3.5 years ago. My biggest concern was, hey, what happens after the next presidential election. This is not a rule that NHTSA's issued that, went through the rulemaking process and is, somewhat permanent part of the regulatory system. This was issued essentially by the administrator of NHTSA, which means that a new administrator can come in and erase the entire program. And it looks like that's what's going to happen. I mean, it's very cynical of them to remove this rule. I mean, these are very new technologies, and in some ways, the media coverage of these events has so heightened that these crashes are going to be noted at some point by NHTSA and looked into anyway. This is essentially Elon Musk saying, well, we're collecting so much data on our vehicles that we know that crashes are going to happen. And so when we have to report these to the government, we look bad, right? And so because Tesla doesn't want to look bad, and because I think they represent something like 40 out of every 45 crashes that have been collected so far, mainly because Tesla's beaming all of its crash data up to the cloud, and they have it and therefore are required to report it, it essentially makes them look bad compared to the rest of the auto world. I would suggest that, in my view, it doesn't make them look bad. It makes them look like they're doing a really job of compliance, and they're doing a really good job of collecting crash data, both of which are great things. But apparently, they've taken the other view that, simply posting public documents that list the number of crashes that Tesla's operating with autopilot or full self-drive engaged on the NHTSA's website is a bad thing, and they want to take it down. So I expect, and I think most of us expect that to happen as one of the first things NHTSA does when they have a new administrator or acting administrator or nominated administrator put into place in about a month and a half.
Oh, do you think he bought influence? That's absolutely shocking. That, to somebody who is crusading against immigrants coming to America would try to buy influence. Oh, wait, he's an immigrant. I'm sorry. I overspoke.
So confusing, this world. So I don't want to tell you how bad my cars are. Donate to the Center for Auto Safety. We'll tell you how bad cars are constantly. And with that, last week we missed it. We missed Fred's Tao. And so this week we're going to do his Tao. Can we do the Tao in 7.5 minutes?
You've now entered the Tao
We
of
can.
Fred.
Okay,
Yes.
so Michael suggested we talk about making software-defined vehicles cyber secure, which was a article that was posted. And this particular article addresses the issue of the possibility of cyber intrusion via malicious sensor inputs after replacing the sensors that do not match the capabilities of the original equipment. So, for example, if you have a radar on the vehicle and it breaks, then you have to replace it with another device to provide similar capabilities. The problem is that if the output of that device doesn't match the output of the previous device, then you've got a problem with correlation when you try to get the artificial intelligence engine working in the perception of what that sensor is bringing in. So
I gotta jump in real quick. So I think we talked about this once before. So I get a radar I'll say a camera. There's a camera, and the one that came with my car gets 5 megapixels response, and then I go to replace it with one that gets 10 megapixels. Is that kind of a thing?
Yeah, that's right. So
a
human being would look at those two images of the cow and say, oh, they're both cows. But a computer has to look at it pixel by pixel and try to represent, that same cow, but with a very different numerical simulation. So what this researcher proposes is that you put an artificial intelligence engine between the sensor and the main computer so that it standardizes all the inputs coming in, and that would allow the main computer to correlate through these images or through the sensor data much more easily, which is true. The problem is that every time you put an artificial engine in place, you're introducing an opaque system where you cannot really trace the inputs to the outputs in the rational way that you would like to have. So it makes it extremely difficult to validate that the system is working properly. And so, putting this together, what they're really proposing is that you have a chain of 3 different artificial intelligence engines that are associated with each of the sensor inputs. So you've got a radar, for example, then there's an artificial intelligence engine that treats the data coming out of the radar so that it matches the format and is consistent with previous information. Then that goes into another artificial intelligence engine, which does the perception, right? Is that an infant by the side of the road, or is that a fire hydrant? Perception is a very important step in that. Then the information from that perception goes into yet another artificial intelligence engine, which looks at the state of the vehicle and the environment around the vehicle to determine what the next move of the control system should be. So, for example, it sees a fire hydrant by the side of the road and it says, well, I don't want to run into that, so I have to turn left. So what this researcher is proposing is that this is an improvement overall in the amount of projected safety and reliability that you're getting from the overall control system. But in order to do that, you have to accept that 3 levels of artificial intelligence can be performed accurately and safely every few milliseconds when you try to update the state of the vehicle. So I think this is very, very challenging. And until computers run a lot faster, like maybe when the quantum computers come out, this is going to be a practical impossibility to run all these sequence of artificial intelligence engines on all the sensors in order to drive the vehicle. So that's a really long, complicated explanation for why this is probably a great research topic and probably always will be.
So we talked about this before, but replacing parts in cars. So we know like Ford and GM, the legacy manufacturers, they have a whole parts infrastructure behind them. Like they're making their own spare parts for vehicles, and there's third parties that make all this stuff. But is there any regulations that require, hey, I sell this Ford Bob car that I have to keep making, these parts for it for the next decade or something like that?
Regulations, oh, you're so cute,
Anthony. Well,
no, but this sounds abstract, but everybody does this every day, because if you go to a website and it's got an interface that says, take these screwy looking numbers and letters and the numerals that are in here and translate that into text that you type in, right? You've seen that where you've got
the captions,
the really weird fonts.
Yeah.
Well, that's a great example, because those really weird fonts are very difficult to be interpreted by the artificial intelligence engine that underlies the character recognition software that the bots are using to try to scoop up the data, scrape the data from the internet. Okay, so this is a good example of how that would actually work. And what this research is proposing is that we need to develop computer technology that will allow us to translate these screwy kind of figures that you're seeing on the computer into the very precise ASCII format that the computer is used to analyzing. So it sounds abstract, but we all do it every day when we're using the internet, logging into sites that have any kind of protection against the intrusion of bots.
You know what site doesn't have those captures you have to fill out? Autosafety.org. Because we do it another way. It's hidden behind the scenes. So you don't have to do that and do a vision test. You can go there. You can click on the red donate button. Why does he keep asking for money? Because it's the end of the year, people. Come on. It's time to donate. It's the season of giving. Fred, I love this. I think it'd be great if there was more information around how people are doing this, like specifically around what you're talking about, replacing these parts. Because especially right now we see with EVs and hybrids that they get in a crash, it's a lot more expensive to repair them because we got to replace these radar systems. We got to replace all this stuff.
Right. And in most of the industry, you got third-party providers for spare parts, right?
Right.
You can go out and get whatever kind of tire that you want. But, when you go to the Piggly Wiggly auto parts store, you've got to take whatever they've got on the shelf. And 5 years from now, it's likely that the radar that you bought in your car originally will be updated into something else. And that something else has got to be compatible with the data you've already accumulated if the artificial intelligence is going to work properly. So this is a future problem, but something that's going to be very difficult to implement in vehicles.
Do we know if any of the legacy manufacturers, if they have a supply chain around these sensors, the radars, the lidars, and whatnot, or are they kind of playing fast and loose like Tesla does?
Well, we know that a lot of them have gone out of business over time.
Like, wait, what do you? I'm talking like Ford, Chrysler, Toyota. That's what I mean. Those, like,
I have no knowledge of what their
okay,
selection process is for their suppliers. I know it's a complex process, but in terms of the durability, the only issue I know of that's come up so far in this industry is preservation of the software and the problem that's associated with the company going out of business that has provided previously a software-defined vehicle for public use. That software is no longer going to be upgraded, and
mm,
so you're screwed basically.
Thanks,
well,
Fisker.
yeah, there won't be any cybersecurity threats to your cars in the future. Don't worry, people, you'll be fine.
Well, no cybersecurity threat if you can't operate it, and it's just going to sit in your driveway.
It will look cool though. Hey, speaking of looking cool, let's do some recalls.
Strap in. Time for the
Yay!
recall
Nissan.
Hey.
Nissan 322,671 vehicles, the 2013 to 2016 Nissan Pathfinder. Wait, I like this. On certain Pathfinder vehicles, dust, dirt, and contamination may accumulate on and around the bell crank lever point joint. This may lead to mechanical binding,
Right.
forcing the lever to remain open.
This isn't a new recall. This is a recall that got a submission in the middle of November that we had pointed out to us by our companion organization, the Automobile Protection Association in Canada, who said that they're having some owners complain about this because Nissan issued this recall in June of 2022, I believe is the date, somewhere around there, May or June 2022. And so far, owners have no repair for it. So we are about 2.5 years into this recall that is simply to repair a hood latch that's coming undone, and Nissan has been unable to get these owners a fix. I think this is the longest period I've ever seen for a recall to actually happen for owners, and for a manufacturer to require owners to drive around with potentially life-threatening condition in their vehicle. So I wanted to point this one out just because of that significance, and also to have owners contact NHTSA and let them know this is not okay, that it's not okay to issue a recall and not have a fix for 2.5 years for your owners. It looks like the final fix won't be coming until the late first quarter of next year. So they're going to be waiting ultimately almost 3 years for a recall fix on these Nissan hood latches, which is completely unacceptable.
Crazy.
I've just heard that Nissan and Honda are thinking about a merger. Is that going to have any effect on this?
They are. I heard that Nissan stock went up significantly on that news, and Honda's went down a little, which is probably what you should expect. Nissan has struggled significantly in the past few years, and there's some consolidation going on in the industry that they both Honda and Nissan might benefit from an arrangement like that.
If they merge, do you think they can change their company name to Datsun?
Ooh.
Anyway.
That's probably better than Nanda.
Or Nita.
Nita, come on. God, I remember as a kid watching the commercials, like, we used to be called Datsun. Now we're called Nissan. And it was like, it's a very complex commercial. As a little kid, I was like, why is this playing during my Saturday morning cartoons? Anyway. Yeah, what?
I was going to say they made some nice Datsun pickups back in the day. I missed those.
Next recall, Chrysler. 2,135 vehicles, the 2021 to 2023 Jeep Renegades. They're violating FMVSS 49. Oh my God, I'm not even going to get into that. This is something to do with lamps. Backup lamps.
It's FMVSS 108. You were going into the Code of Federal Regulations. You should stay out of that, Anthony. That's not your domain.
There is a restraining order.
So essentially, these Jeep Renegades, they have your reverse lamps that come on when you put your vehicle into reverse. they are not they're not sufficient to light up anything. I'm supposing is what's going on. It looks like there's an issue with they put the wrong bumper lamp assembly on the wrong vehicles. And so they're going to have to go back and replace those with the correct bumper lamp assembly. And it looks like owners won't be hearing about this until the end of January. And they're going to do it. It also looks like they don't know which vehicles have the bad bumper lamps, so they're going to have to take a look at your vehicle, do an inspection. If you have the proper lamps, you're good. You go home. If not, they're going to replace them.
In the meantime, we suggest you don't back up, right? All right, next up, General Motors, 7,606 vehicles, the 2025 Chevrolet Equinox EV. Uh-oh, I thought these things were kind of good. Uh-oh, the pedestrian alert sound system in these vehicles may have an incorrect software calibration and may not produce exterior sound at the required relative volume. When the whistler, can I call it? Is it a whistler? You know, these EVs.
It can be, yeah. It can be a whistle. There's a couple other sounds I think that can be used, but
no longer farts.
None of that weird stuff that the industry tried to get in a couple of years back. But this is basically the federal safety standard that requires those quieter hybrid and electric vehicles to make a noise when they're traveling at lower speeds. So you hit a certain speed where the vehicle just simply at that speed driving through air creates a noise that can alert pedestrians. But at the lower speeds, the problem here is between the speeds of 12 and 18 miles per hour or so. These vehicles it seems like it doesn't look like they're not creating a noise at all. They're just not creating a noise that's loud enough to be detected by pedestrians at those speeds. And so they're going to have to go back, and it looks like they're basically updating the software to correct the condition and to increase the volume at those speeds.
I suggest they put playing cards in the spokes, so when they drive along.
That works.
I think it does work.
Yeah.
Last recall, Kia, 1,385 vehicles, the 2025 Kia Sorento plug-in hybrid. During certain frontal collisions, the front subframe may become displaced rearward, causing the steering rack to contact and damage the fuel line. Uh-oh.
Yeah, these vehicles, I think it's just some of them, not all of them, have this rack-mounted motor-driven power steering system that apparently during certification testing of some sort, they found that when the vehicles hit in a frontal collision, the frame displaces rearward and moves the steering rack right into the fuel line, which can damage the fuel line, fuel leak, and all the bad things that happen from that point on. But looks like the fix is pretty readily available. They've already put it into place on the assembly line, and it's essentially going to be putting additional protective covering around that fuel line so that when this does inevitably happen, hopefully there's more protection for the fuel line when the subframe displacement happens, and makes your steering rack contact the fuel line. So hopefully that fix is good enough to prevent these issues. Although, I don't know, a little protective coating doesn't sound like a whole lot of protection to me.
Well, with that, listeners, that is the end of this episode. And it is the end of us for this year, because we have the next 2 weeks off because we're doing our annual retreat to Guam where we count snakes.
Yep.
No, it's just next week is there's 2 weeks in a row of holidays. I don't know. Maybe we'll play some repeats, something like that.
I'm sure we could find some. We could do a Dow of Fred review and just go back and look at all the interesting topics that have been covered there.
That's maybe what we'll have to do. Maybe we will throw a new one in here somehow. Not next week, though. Snake counting next week.
Yeah, but listeners, give us a Christmas present. Send us your queries. Send us your comments. Send us your appraisal of what we're doing. And we'd like to improve. We're far from perfection. So we really would like to get some inputs from you as to ways we can serve you better.
And with that, thank you. Till next time. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Happy holidays.
For more information, visit www.autosafety.org.